Today's show is brought to you by CBRE. CBRE is the #1 agency lender in the U.S. Their loans offer great features such as non-recourse debt, up to 80% leverage, and interest-only periods, all at the market's most competitive rates. To find out more and get a special deal only available to Old Dawg listeners, go to www.cbquote.com/podcast. That's the letter C and the letter B, quote.com/podcast.
This episode of the Old Dawg's REI Network is brought to you by Mino Studio.
In a world where jobs are how most people make money, one man, one desire, one challenge dares to break the mold. Welcome to the Old Dawg's REI Network, where we don't work for money. Money works for us. Coming soon. Viewer discretion advised.
Welcome to the Old Dawg's REI Network, where cash flow is king. Real estate investing, the means, so you can enjoy your retirement dreams. This is the show where we cut right to the chase. No sales pitch, no long monologues, just simple how-to real estate investing advice, so you can earn the passive income you need to enjoy your retirement today. And now, your host and chief Old Dawg, Bill Manacero.
Welcome to the Old Dawg's REI Network. I'm your host, Bill Manacero, and this is the show where 50-plussers and anyone else who wants to join us get solid, no sales pitch real estate investing advice to help generate real cash flow. This podcast airs twice weekly on Mondays and Fridays, and if you aren't already a subscriber, go to iTunes, type in Old Dawg, spelled D-A-W-G, find our podcast, and subscribe. Well, we got a great show for you today. A young man who just basically took real estate investing by the horns and just has been going gangbusters. I had the pleasure of meeting him. He lives nearby to where I am. In fact, where my office is in Irvine. Got a chance to chat. At that time, and it wasn't that long ago, he didn't have any properties, but that has changed, okay, in a very short period of time. His name is Bo Kim, and Bo works as a senior consultant for a regional CPA firm here in Southern California and has been working in the accounting industry for the past 5 years. Bo got his start in real estate investing by house hacking his first primary residence in Orange County, and since then has picked up 16 units across the Midwest markets of Kansas City, Indianapolis, and Little Rock using various methods such as seller financing, BRRRR, HELOC, delayed financing, and private lending. Now, Bo, a lot has happened since the last time I talked to him, but he's also the host of the Bigger Cash Flow podcast, which is something I'm sure we're all going to want to listen to because we all want bigger cash flow, right? A show aimed to help newbie real estate investors take back control of their finances. He is an avid writer on his blog, and he's going to share where that is located, where he shares tips and tricks. Hey, it just sounds like my show. Tips, terminology, and techniques. No, tips and tricks on personal finance, increasing income, and living a life of purpose. Well, Bo, welcome to officially here, the Old Dawg's REI Network.
Hey, Bill, that was quite the introduction. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure, man. I always get stoked. You're not an old dog, so, I have to kind of preface that at the beginning, but, we old dogs, we can learn new tricks from young pups too. So, we're definitely interested in hearing your story. It's a neat story. We're talking less than a year, right? Since we last talked.
Yeah, early last year.
Yeah. And it's 16 units. Man, you have been just taken off here. And so I want to hear all about it. I want to hear all about the properties, the markets, and all the other stuff, the techniques you're using as well. But before we get started, I'd like the listeners to really get to know who Bo is, and, tell us your story, how you got here and what brought you into real estate.
Yeah, sure thing. So, like you mentioned, currently I work a day job, a W-2 worker for a regional CPA firm. And I've been in the accounting industry for 5 to 6 years, straight out of college, just working, and got the traditional advice of go to college, get a great education, get a good job, and save. And one day you'll be able to retire from your retirement savings. And I was on that path until I picked up this little book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where they talk about assets and liabilities and how you need to create streams of income, not just accumulate. So that was very different from the advice that I was told from my parents. And they are immigrants coming from South Korea, and they taught me the value of a strong work ethic. However, they didn't really have a good grasp on their financials. So what I did was I started to educate myself on personal finance, and I got intrigued in the FIRE movement. But I wasn't only intrigued in retiring early, but more so focused on chasing what really matters to me and following my passion. So what I did was I started becoming more active on the Bigger Pockets forums. I started talking to other investors, and I realized that 90% of the world's millionaires have real estate in their portfolio, and that's like the key part of their portfolio. So I figured if I'm not going to be some sort of startup entrepreneur or a big time, business owner, then I might as well figure out a way to understand real estate and incorporate that into my portfolio. So I started doing just that. And the way that I started unknowingly was through an house hack. So, as you might be able to relate, Bill, in Orange County, housing prices have gone up tremendously since,
Crazy, yeah.
2010. Yeah, it's gone up so high. I bought my first primary just because I thought, I wanted a house, the warm and fuzzy feeling that it gives you, right? So after being married to my wife for about a year, I was like, hey, honey, let's buy a house. I think we can both afford it. And what I did was it was a 3-bedroom, 3-bath townhouse, and I rented out one of the rooms for $750 a month. And some of my friends who are listening from out of state might be shocked that you can rent a room for $750, where in the Midwest markets of Indianapolis, you might be able to get a whole house for $750.
It's true.
Yeah. So I was able to do that and reduce my mortgage payment from about $2,750 to about $2,000, which was very comfortable and close to my 2-bedroom apartment. So once I did that, I just realized there was a light bulb moment. I was like, hey, this is very passive, and I'm able to reduce my expenses and even allocate more of my monthly income towards investing. So then I started to look at ways that I can create more passive income. And that's when I started to reach out into the Midwest markets of Indy, Kansas City, and Little Rock.
Amazing. Now, why did you pick those particular markets?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. I think I applied some of the principles that I learned from my W-2 job. So I work as a senior consultant, and basically what we do is we audit public companies who are also being monitored by the SEC. And what we do is we take a top-down risk assessment approach, meaning, what is a risk to this company as a whole, and what are some controls we can put in place to mitigate those risks. So what I did was I looked at the markets, the multiple Midwest markets, from a top-down approach. So I looked at, the macroeconomics, population, job growth, purchase price to rent ratio, things like that, and identified a couple of markets that kind of fit my own criteria. And how I developed that criteria in the beginning, because I didn't know anything, was just talk to a bunch of investors, from RIA groups to Facebook mastermind groups to Bigger Pockets forums. I didn't have to recreate the wheel just because I knew that there were a lot of successful investors and entrepreneurs already out there. So I, talked to people like you, Bill, and I started to create my own category and my own criteria. And then I just applied it to my research. And my research told me that the Midwest markets of Indy, Kansas City, and Little Rock had great benefits from a rent to price ratio to the types of homes that I wanted to invest in, the job growth, the diverse economy, and also landlord-friendly tenant laws. Because, here in California, I'm sure you're aware, if you have a tenant that's not paying and they file bankruptcy, it might be months, even over a year until you get your property back. So those things were very important to me when I first started my research.
That's great. It's fascinating too that you're able to. You mentioned RIA meetings and a lot of online sources. Your job sounds like it definitely takes a lot of your time as well. I don't know if you're in a 9 to 5 slot, but I imagine there are days where you're definitely putting in more hours. How are you able to do this while having a full-time job? It seems like in a pretty demanding industry.
Yeah, great question. One of the quotes that I really, attribute my, growth to is the quote that goes, if you really want something, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. So I told myself this when I was first embarking on this journey. And I told myself, hey, Bo, what are the things that you need to do right now to make sure you meet your goals and objectives of building out your rental portfolio? And one of the things I saw was that I needed to network and I needed to get the right people on my team, whether that be a broker, a wholesaler, or a turnkey provider, just getting started. So I noticed that fortunately for me, in the Midwest markets, they operate on a different time zone, 2 to 3 hours ahead. So I'll be waking up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning and setting up meetings as soon as, the market open, quote unquote. So if they operate a short, Friday, Saturday, Sunday deal, so take one day off, to understand my market, talk to these people in person, because I'm 2,000 miles away. So I'm kind of at their mercy when it comes to, them being my eyes and ears. So I needed to vet them out for myself and make sure that there is a level of trust going both ways. So I think doing those things early on really helped my business.
Oh, wow. That's great. So you start 5 o'clock in the morning doing some of the work that you have to try to build the foundation for your portfolio growth, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if everybody kind of takes a look at, their past 4 weeks and really think about where they spent their time, it could have been, spending time with family and friends or a demanding W-2 job, but you're also going to find pockets of time where you may have been on YouTube or Netflix and watching a movie. And also all those things are great, but they might not be revenue generating activities, right? So like RGAs. So you want to figure out what those are, if this is something that you really want, and chase after it.
God, that's great. And how does you sounds like a fairly new marriage for the most part too. How does your wife feel about the whole real estate investing aspect of your life now?
That's a funny question because my wife and I were so different in terms of personalities. So I'm kind of like the analytical thinker, and my wife is very, she's an artist, right? She's a graphic designer by trade. So she's very different from me, but she's very understanding, which really helps. So I would tell her, the big picture of what I'm planning to do, and here are the numbers that I ran. And she'll kind of give her 2 cents in terms of, hey, make sure, we mitigate this risk, and you're thinking about some of the blind spots that I'm not seeing. So although she doesn't understand the nuts and bolts of how our portfolio is built, she definitely understands it from a high level, and she's, giving me enough rope to go and build this thing out. So I'm very thankful for her.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Now, let's talk about maybe that first property. So you were house hacking. You realized real estate, definitely has something to offer here. Do you remember your first purchase and what led you to that?
Yep. Property in the market of Kansas City, Missouri. And I was looking at this property about a month in after I started my research. And I noticed that this property was on the turnkey provider's listing for about a good 3 to 4 weeks. So a
single family home? Or?
Yeah, it's a single family ranch style home with a basement, very typical in Kansas City. And I was very interested in this because it was a 3-in-1 in a C plus neighborhood. So it was a working class neighborhood, and I knew that it's going to cash on cash about 12 to 13%, which is kind of right in my criteria. So I did a little bit more research about the neighborhood, talked to a bunch of investors who invest in that suburb, and I kind of, got the green light from multiple people. So I always like to check with investors who are in that market to know some of the pitfalls and the risks. And then I got to negotiating. So there were a couple of times I ended up negotiating in the front end. So I knew that this property was on their listing for about 3 to 4 weeks. So I, negotiated about $2,000 off. So, lesson to everybody who might say that, turnkey providers, they don't like to negotiate. That's not true. You never get what you don't ask for, right? So I made sure that I negotiated on the front end. And then, I did the inspection report, and there were some concerning items in terms of the useful life of the roof and some of the other items. So I made sure that those repairs were done, and we negotiated a roof replacement. So those things were completed. And during this time, I quote unquote had an informal mentor who had about 24 units across Indianapolis and Alabama. And I'm really thankful for him because I met him through Facebook, and he really kind of, opened up his knowledge base and kind of helped me understand some of the nuances that come with reading an inspection report, asking the right questions, because you might not have all the answers, but if you ask the right questions, I think that's going to be key in making sure that you're not being burned in the situation.
Sure.
So I did all that, and then I, closed in 30 days, and yeah, it cash flowed pretty well. But this actually, I think I told you, Bill, is my worst performer out of, my 16 units, because in 4 months after I closed, the tenant stopped paying, and we had to start an eviction process. So I don't know if you wanted me to go into detail on that one, but yeah, that was my lesson learned there.
Well, just a couple of questions. First off, really some good stuff for our listeners there. A lot of people, myself, when I first started, I bought turnkey. I did not do the inspections, and later on, I wish I would have, because I did find out some things that did end up costing me money that I should have caught early on in the purchase. But did you also vet your turnkey company? Just that's definitely a strong relationship you have to establish, because they are your property manager. They find your tenants. They're plus the property itself.
Yep, that's a great question. So that's one thing that I failed to do as much as I hoped to do. Looking back, there were some red flags that I should have caught in terms of how the turnkey provider operates and some of the promises that they made, just making sure that I had those documented. Because, for example, they promised me some of these things that they were going to do. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I had it all via phone call. I didn't have it in an email. I didn't have it on the property management software portal. So later on, when I had to terminate my lease with the property manager and move on to another property manager because they didn't keep their end of the bargain, I just really didn't have anything to go off of, because it was just hearsay at that point, because they fired 3 property managers in the 1 year that I was working with them.
Wow.
So their property management, it was just a mess. And nobody knew what was going on. And at the end of the day, I just didn't want to deal with it any longer. So I just had to leave them and go with another property manager. So by the time that I left them in a year, I picked up 3 more properties in Kansas City, and I found somebody that I really trust. They were very transparent, and they did a great job. So I naturally moved my first turnkey property with them.
So they're also another turnkey provider?
They're actually not a turnkey provider. So this is very interesting. So in Kansas City, you need a broker's license to be a property manager. And this person, they used to have their broker's license. They do not anymore. So it's quote unquote unlicensed administrative services. So basically, they don't process the payments for me, but they're kind of my eyes and ears on the ground. They mainly do remodeling services. So they have a really great price when it comes to rehabs and make readies and things like that. And they also manage about 200 units in the Kansas City area for other owners. So they do the paperwork, they do the marketing, things like that.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So they're almost like kind of like a wholesaler then. They try to find under market properties that they could rehab for you, and then you take it on from there. Do they refer you to a property manager, or how does that part happen?
Yeah, so I guess I don't have a property manager per se. So they're kind of my eyes and ears. They do all the paperwork that I need somebody local to do. But I'm still kind of like the owner, and I do manage the manager, so to say. And they also do the marketing, the advertising, and finding new tenants, things like that.
Oh, okay. I got it. I got it. So, but the day-to-day management you're actually doing yourself then, is that right? Or
Yes, but I would say about 90% of the work is being done by them.
okay.
So basically, if they collect rents, they just mail it to me. So they don't process the payment because that's like the biggest part of what a property manager does. But everything else, when it comes to rent readies, advertisement, and rehabs, they manage it all.
Got it. Got it. Well, you boomed from there. I mean, you sound like you recovered well from that and then moved on. But I would imagine in the course of the 16 units that you have purchased, you would have encountered some certain mistakes. It sounds like you shared a little bit there, but what would you say so far has been your biggest mistake in your real estate investing?
Yeah, so my biggest mistake would have been not taking action early enough. And what I mean by that is there was an opportunity about 4 months into my real estate investing where a broker brought me a property in like a B-class neighborhood. And it was on the market for about $60,000. And I knew that ARV in that area for a 3-bed, 1-bath property goes for anywhere from $110,000 and up. So there was about $50,000 in equity to be played around with. And I asked them for a rent ready bid, and it came to about $15,000. So even with that, you still would have had about $35,000 in equity, not including, some of the financing costs, closing costs, and administrative costs and holding costs. So I would have, hopped in that deal knowing what I know now. But back then, I just couldn't really trust my own numbers, so to say. So for example, on the ARV, what I do is I look at, in a 0.5 mile radius, I look at the was that sold in the last 6 months. And in terms of a rent ready bid, I compare it to all of my other rent readies and things like that. Rent ratios, I look at Rentometer, Zillow, Hot Pads, all of these other type of resources. But back then I didn't know any of that. So when my broker, who has a ton of experience, about 20 years experience in the business, was kind of walking me through the numbers, I was still apprehensive and I was unsure. But the funny thing is, a day or two later, it was placed under contract by another experienced investor that I knew. So I knew immediately that I missed out on a deal. So that would have been the biggest mistake that I made, about losing, $35,000 in equity.
Wow. And what did you learn from that that will be something that you'll apply in future investments?
Yeah, for sure. So, one of the things that I now understand is that just because you place it under contract doesn't mean that you have to close. And there are contingencies in place that will protect you if the seller is not disclosing all the facts. What I mean by that is the seller might advertise it and say that there is a central air, but it turns out there isn't, and it's just window units, for example. That's, to me, is a material change because central air could bring in more in rent, and central air might cost about, $4,000 to place in versus a window unit that might be a couple $100. So when you place it under contract, there's ways you can protect yourself with an inspection contingency, an appraisal contingency if you're getting financed, things like that, where you can still back out of the deal if the seller isn't being 100% truthful. So knowing what I know now, I would have definitely placed that property under contract and continued to do my due diligence. And some might say, hey, you might lose out on an inspection cost of, $300-$400. But to that, I say, it's the cost of doing business. So if I get an inspection and it turns out not to be the property that I wanted, then, I lose out on that. But, on the flip side of that, if I don't get an inspection, like you mentioned earlier, there might be thousands of dollars that you're leaving on the table by not negotiating a reduced purchase price or just walking away.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what would you say so far has been your biggest success in your real estate investing endeavors?
Yeah, this one's an easy one. Just taking action. So, another quote that I love quotes, and one of the quotes that I really like is, action without knowledge is dangerous, but knowledge without action is useless. So you might have all the, knowledge in the world, but if you don't take any action against it, then it's just going to sit there, right? But so you want to make sure that you take action, but, make sure that you do some sort of analysis, not to the point that it's going to, trap you from taking any action, but you'll be so thankful that you took an earlier step than you do later on in your life.
Sure. Well, that's a really good quote. I love these quotes. I can hardly wait till wrap it up section here to find out what your favorite quote is. But, our audience, as you know, are, at least the people that we target the podcast to are people that are 50 plus in age. And some of them are working and they're, getting prepared for retirement. Others are already retired. And what advice would you have for that group? Now, you've got some unique abilities and skills here also because you're an accountant. And so, you can take into consideration that these people will be going to a fixed income or they'll be subject to, their nest egg, so to speak, in terms of their survival through retirement. And what advice would you have for them as far as investing and how to get started so that they can utilize real estate investing for their retirement years?
Yeah, great question, Bill. I mean, when I looked at this question, I was kind of thinking, some of the conversation that I had with my parents. So both of my parents, they're in their early 60s. They're looking ahead towards retirement, and I've worked in a mutual fund company for about a year and a half, and I also worked in accounting. So as I was talking to them about their finances and some of their advices, they were looking ahead to prepare for retirement. The word that came to mind was having control. So to me, it seemed like not being enough, I guess, financially prepared for their pending retirement, and also the fact that they didn't have control of their finances. For example, the Wall Street, I was just looking at the S&P 500 for just this year alone. It dipped about 300 points, and then it went back up 200 points. So it seemed like we kind of rebounded a little bit, but I really haven't been paying attention because I'm focused on real estate. And it doesn't really matter for me as a cash flow investor. But for my parents, it really matters a lot because, if they're looking to retire and the market dips 300 points, it might be a percentage of their savings that's totally wiped out that they need to rely on. So I talked to them and I actually helped them sell off their primary residence and purchase another one by downsizing in about the recent 5 months. So what that allowed them to do is reduce their monthly expenses about $600. And they asked me, hey, Bo, can we allocate $600 a month and invest it into cash flowing real estate? So, I'm kind of working with them to find a way to allocate some of their money into cash flowing real estate and take back control of their finances.
God, that's great. Great idea and great advice. Well, you're definitely off to a booming start here. Now, how old, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you, Bo?
Yeah, I'm 29.
Yeah, look at this guy is definitely a young pup here. And you've got a long ways ahead of you here. What is your end game? Where do you want this real estate, where do you want it to go? And how will that impact, sort of the rest of your life?
Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to continue to build up, cash flowing rentals in my portfolio. And I also want to help my parents do the same, like I just mentioned, because, as an immigrant family, they've sacrificed a lot. And coming over here, they came with nothing and they supported my brother and I. So I want to do as much as I can to help my parents in their retirement. So that's one of my, I guess, short 5-year goals, is to create my cash flow and also help them create theirs. And then in the long run, that's a great question. My W-2 job, although it's demanding, there's a lot of perks and there's a lot of benefits. And I love my coworkers and I love what I do. So it's not like I hate my job, so I want to create this cash flowing portfolio so I can quit as fast as I can. That's not the case for me. So I want to continue to build this up. But I think what that's going to allow me to do is make the choices when opportunities come. So if an opportunity comes for me to, travel the world with my family, or an opportunity comes where I really like helping the homeless, so I volunteer once a month at a, homeless shelter. So if there's opportunities for me to work in some capacity to do that, that will be wonderful as well, because I feel like money, although it's not the purpose, it allows you to do the things that you're passionate about and what you want to do and what really fulfills you. So I think by creating that, it's going to give me the opportunity to make those choices.
That's great. Great answer. Now, are you primarily in single family homes? And if so, are you looking at maybe moving into multifamily at all?
Yeah, so right now I'm just looking primarily at single family and duplexes to, fourplexes and things like that. But I am thinking of, how to scale this thing, right? Because 16 units, it's my first year and I'm realizing bookkeeping time is right around the corner, tax filing time. And it's a lot to deal with, right? So you have these property tax bills, electricity bills, and all this thing. So I got to figure a way to scale this thing and just make sure if I get an 8-plex or a 16 unit, then it's going to be one mortgage, one property tax bill, and things like that. So yeah, I'm thinking of ways to do it. But right now in the markets that I'm in, good multifamily, like well-priced multifamily, are far and few between, like you've probably experienced in Indianapolis. So yeah, I'm constantly on the lookout, but we'll see if one that fits my criteria pops up in the near future.
So regarding the properties that you have, the 16 units, do you monitor the equity and the appreciation that's going on there? And if so, where are you seeing the best growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. The best growth, I'm seeing it in Kansas City and Indianapolis. They're kind of neck and neck. And, I'm forcing appreciation on a lot of these properties. So I bought 3 of them turnkey, and the remaining I did a hybrid like BRRRR approach with delayed refinancing and things like that. So I'm seeing that in Indianapolis, I'm able to get a little bit more equity after I do some repairs. Kansas City, same thing, is there's so many investors out there and they're setting these new appraisal comps. So if I buy a property that is very similar in the rehab and the layout, then I'm more likely than not going to be able to get a similar appraisal value. So I like those 2 markets for appreciation. In terms of Little Rock, I love that they have low taxes. I mean, it's literally like the half or 1/3 of Indy.
Wow.
And yeah, but they don't appreciate as much based on my conversations with locals. So they're kind of more steady Eddie when it comes to downward markets or even upswing markets. But you're going to get that steady cash flow, which is what I really am in the game for.
Sure. Well, you mentioned that you do seller financing, the BRRR, you've got HELOC, delayed financing, private lending. Which of those seems to be working the best for you right now? What approach, or does it just depend on the property?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the property. It depends on the deal. If it's the price that I'm getting, or if it's the terms that I'm getting. For example, on a seller finance duplex, there were 2 duplexes in Kansas City where the price was close to market, but the terms were so good. They were only 12% down, 5.25% interest, 30-year amortization. So it's going to cash flow really nicely for me, but I paid at market. So they aren't those BRRRR types where through hard work and renovations, I'm able to get about 20 to 30K in equity. In terms of the BRRRR strategy, I love the delayed refinance strategy where I'm buying a property, let's just say for round numbers, I'm buying a property for $50,000 that needs about $8,000 worth of work. It's just some flooring, carpet, and some furnishings and fixtures. And in that market, I'm able to get it appraised for $70,000, $75,000. So what I do is I use a private lender to buy it all cash for $50,000 and $8,000 for the rehab. And then I turn around and go to a bank and say, hey, I have this great property. Would you like to put a mortgage note on it? And they're like, yes. So, they put 75% loan to value note on it. And if you're only 180 days from the purchase price, so within that 6-month seasoning, they cap the appraised value to the purchase price plus closing or 75% of the appraised value, whichever is less. So, if it's $70,000, what's 75% of that? Let's do a quick math here. That's about $52,500. So I'm able to recoup most of my money without 6-month seasoning. So in these deals, I'll probably have less than $10,000 all in and 25% equity and a cash flowing property.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Do you have some properties you paid cash for, or they all have mortgages?
So I have 2 properties that I paid cash for, and this is a different strategy. These are Section 8 homes that are kind of in more of a C minus. Some might call it D class neighborhoods in the inner city. But I've actually, driven past these neighborhoods and I'm familiar with these streets. And these are properties that I buy for all cash at like $35,000. And I rent them out to Section 8 voucher holders for $800, $850. So it's a very different type of investing. I know that these aren't B plus A class tenants, but they're cash flowing so well. These are over the 2% rule. And, I'm kind of hedging my risk and diversifying my portfolio that way.
Have you encountered any of the inspections for Section 8 yet that are required on a regular basis?
Yeah, so I have it once a year, and I have done it for 2 of my 3 Section 8 properties. And I actually prefer it because although, you're having to make some minor repairs and whatnot, but it really gives me a good handle on the current condition of the property. And it helps me understand that, if there's any deferred maintenance that needs to be done in the eyes of the Section 8, community, then those needs are met. So I actually prefer having that inspection, believe it or not.
Ah, great. Have you done any more turnkeys since that first experience?
Yeah, so I did a couple more turnkeys, and some of the benefits that I saw early on is that number one, you're getting to finance all of this rehab, right? Because the risk with you doing a do-it-yourself rehab is that you need to buy it right, you need to have the right renovation budget, and the key thing is you need to get it appraised at the value that you think you're going to get it appraised for. Whereas a turnkey provider, they bake it all into the purchase price, and you're just putting 20% down and you're financing it. So if it doesn't appraise, you go back to the negotiation table or you simply walk away. So you're reducing a lot of that risk. So I picked up a couple more turnkeys in Indianapolis and also in Little Rock that helped me establish a relationship with the property manager and also the broker. And now that same broker is helping me find single family and duplexes in the same market.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's what it should be. That's excellent.
Hello, old dogs. Before we jump into our wrap it up session, I just want to share a valuable tip for you. You can find the best off-market properties at below market value and within a hot emerging market and think you've found a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But without good financing, all that great stuff means nothing. However, our new sponsor, CBRE, may be the solution. CBRE has a loan for your next refinance, acquisition, or value add project. CBRE is the #1 agency lender, and their loans offer great features such as non-recourse debt, which unlike most banks means your exposure is limited to the property only and not your personal assets. They also offer you up to 80% leverage in interest-only periods, which can help you maximize your cash flow or pull out more equity. CBRE's loans also offer the market's most competitive rates. In addition to traditional mortgages, their short-term bridge loan platform provides access to competitive financing for your rehab, renovation, and value-add projects that might take a little extra TLC before you get a permanent mortgage. And get this, CBRE is offering Old Dawg listeners a $3,500 credit towards closing costs. That's right, $3,500 off your closing costs. Lock in your credit and receive an instant quote by visiting www.cbquote.com/podcasts. That's the letter C and the letter B, quote.com/podcasts. See what CBRE can do for you and lock in your credit today at www.cbquote.com/podcast. Well, Bo, we have kind of zipped along here, and I have a ton more questions for you, but I think in respect to your time, we are going to move into our Wrap It Up session, and that's where I ask you a series of quick questions to where you can share resources to our listeners, and hopefully there'll be some good, valuable information in there as well for them. So if you're ready, are you ready to wrap it up?
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with favorite real estate book.
Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller.
Great choice. Favorite business book.
The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss.
Good. And how about your most valuable website for success other than your own?
It's actually going to be Facebook.
Oh, wow.
I'm in a ton of real estate investor forums in the Facebook groups, and they have been invaluable in terms of networking, meeting local investors, and getting, my questions answered, right? Although, you can't trust everything that's out on the internet, but once you meet certain experienced investors, you can pick their brain. So that's been really valuable for me.
How do you find those groups?
Yeah, so you do a search on the search bar and you filter it by groups. And there's going to be, closed groups and open groups. So you have to request to join. And there are some secret groups, meaning you can't search for them. But if you ask around to other investors and ask them for, hey, are there any groups that you're a part of that are accepting new members? And I've joined about, half a dozen that way.
Wow, that's great. And when you search, what you just search under real estate investing?
Yep. Some of the keywords that I use is real estate investing or the market. So I am in a group called Indianapolis Out-of-State Investors. Or there's also other regions that I'm a part of. So for example, like Washington, I don't even invest there, but I'm a part of that group because that group is very interactive and they have lots of tips, not only for the state of Washington, but real estate investing in general. So, Facebook over the years to me has become a platform where a lot of people are just throwing advertisements and funny videos on there. But I slowly switched that around by subscribing to all of these groups. Now all of my feed is filled with real estate and I just love it.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat. What about your favorite app?
It's got to be Redfin. So it's kind of like Zillow. Redfin is where I put all of my search notifications on for new property that hits the market. And that's how I find new leads.
Just out of curiosity, do you feel their values of homes are accurate?
I felt like they were more on the conservative side when it comes to comparing it to Zillow and Trulia. So I actually prefer the estimate of Redfin more than the others. But still, I like to do my own with actual sold comps.
That's the best way. Yeah, excellent. How about, here we go, drum roll please, your favorite quote.
All right. So my favorite quote is one by Zig Ziglar, and it says, you can have everything you want in life as long as you help others get what they want first. And I think it really talks about, how real estate investing and life in general is relationship driven. And if you strive to create win-win relationships, everybody's going to win.
Couldn't agree with you more. Well, our final question here. If something happened and just devastating, you lost everything, all of your resources, all your properties, and all you had left was $1,000 in cash, what would you do with that $1,000 to rebuild your real estate investing business?
First of all, I'd take that 1,000, about half of it, and buy all of the books that I bought. I probably spent that much in real estate investing books. And although books can't tell you the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts of how to execute, it provides tremendous value in terms of getting your mindset straight and understanding the broad concepts that a real estate investor needs to know. So I'd start there, and I'd invest the other 500 in taking people, like you, to lunch and picking your brain, right? Taking successful people out for coffee and lunch and just understanding and learning from how they've learned from people before them. So I think that's the best way to spend $1,000.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening here that are very just impressed with your approach and your story, and just the amount of properties you've acquired in a short period of time. Are you open to folks contacting you and maybe asking you more questions offline?
Yeah, definitely. I have a website called biggercashflow.com. So feel free to check out my blog and my post there. You can also reach me at bo@biggercashflow.com. That's my email address. And I also have an Instagram page, Bigger Cashflow. Feel free to reach out.
And you've got a podcast. You got to tell us about your podcast, dude.
Yeah, that's true. It's called the Bigger Cashflow Podcast. And, I launched it because I was getting very similar questions day in and day out. And I feel like I'm learning too every day by talking with different investors and going to these networking events. So I interview exciting people. And it's not just for real estate, but also for business and entrepreneurs in general. But I am passionate about real estate. So I would say 80% of the content is directed at real estate. So feel free to check out my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. Bigger Cash Flow.
Love it. I love it. Well, you know how we end these podcasts if you've ever listened before. So I'm hoping you've practiced here. And are you ready to close us out with your best old hound dog howl?
Let's do it. Ooh.
Oh, that was a cool one. That was like a hound dog with sunglasses on,
I love it.
Anyway, but Bo, man, it's been great having you on. Thanks a lot for coming on. This has been a great show.
Truly enjoyed it, Bill. We'll catch you next time.
Oh, you bet. And I also want to thank all our Old Dawg listeners out there, too, for joining us. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing right now, but the fact that you've taken the time to join us means a lot, and we greatly appreciate it. Please note everything presented here today, including some of the links that we talked about in our Wrap It Up section, as well as extensive notes on what he is talking about and how he's buying properties and so forth. That all can be accessed in our detailed show notes on the Old Dawgs website at olddogsreinetwork.com/blog, and you're going to look for the episode with Bo Kim. Well, that's the show for today. Remember, cash flow is king and real estate investing the means. Until next time, keep moving forward and may God bless.
Thank you very much for visiting the Old Dawgs REI Network. We would greatly appreciate if you would stop by iTunes and let us know what you think of the show. We would love if you could subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. The more ratings and reviews we receive, the more visible the podcast will be to others. Thank you.